Okay, chisme time. So last year, I quit dating. Spoiler alert, it's awful. The last guy I went out with was a white guy. I dated a lot of white guys. I know, I'm hashtag problematic. This guy, let's call him Daniel, because from what I remember, he had those Daniel Craig eyes, and that's good stuff. So Daniel, like a lot of the white boys I went out with, has a Latina fetish. This isn't a call out. I clearly have a white boy fetish, so naturally I would encounter a lot of white boys who had a Latina fetish or any other ethnicity fetish. So it's not really a problem. It's problematic, but not a problem. At least I don't think. Anyway, so I meet up with Latina fetishist Daniel, and we were having a nice conversation over lunch. And I made the joke, as you do, that if we ever had children, they would probably look white because my mom looks white and he's a white boy, so my kids naturally would look like little tiny golden ones. And I would look like the nanny or the housekeeper or that lovely combination of both. And Latina fetishist Daniel was like, really? Your mom looks white? Is she from Guadalajara? Because I know there's a lot of European looking people in that part of Mexico. Mija, I was shook. How does this white boy from Northern California know this about Mexico? My parents are from Mexico and I barely know this. When I asked him, how do you know this about Mexico? He just replied, I'm a fan of Mexico, which I should have deciphered based on the fact that he liked to be called güero. I also remember him during this conversation we were having making references to things about Mexico that only a person from Mexico or of Mexican descent knows. ¿Cómo así? Then of course, like all white bras I dated, he spoke Spanish to me. And don't worry, I could say bra. I've dated a lot of surfers. Fun fact, surfers love Costa Rica and have enough sense to know that not all brown girls are Mexican. So, mana to you guys. I have so many feelings about these white boys like Daniel who speak Spanish as a flex. When I was dating these white boys, I thought it was cute. This guy is speaking Spanish to bridge the cultural divide. I thought it was fun. Looking back on it though, not the biggest fan of it anymore. Look, if you want to show that you're inclusive and not prejudiced, and you feel that the best way to show that is by speaking Spanish, okay, I guess? For the folks with their hearts in the right place, I can't be mad. If it's a weird flex but okay moment, that's when I start to get cranky. Like, one, how do you know I even speak Castilian? A lot of Latinos and Hispanics don't speak it, and that's okay. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you're dealing with a third generation and on Latino or Hispanic, most likely they're not gonna speak Spanish. They've been here too long. Speaking Spanish has nothing to do really with your Latino-ness, with your Hispanicness. The other reason, too, a lot of children of immigrants only speak English because of racism and things like Juan Crow. Yes, Juan Crow is a thing that actually happened in Texas, look it up. To avoid racism in all forms, a lot of parents never taught their children Spanish. So these bras speaking Spanish as an aesthetic, knowing full well that there's a lot of kids who know habla because of racism, rubs me the wrong way. Anyway, at the time, racial fetishist Daniel, with his better Spanish than mine, was cool. It was impressive. It was cute. Now, it's hilarious. Mainly because it didn't work out, obviously. And why didn't it work out? Here are my two best guesses. As stated earlier, dating sucks. It's the worst. It has to be one of those levels of hell Dante's always writing about. Especially being an ugly girl in Los Angeles, dating is the worst. Although to be fair, I know that bros were equal caca to pretty girls, so it's a crapshoot out here. The other reason I have is I was too whitewashed for racial fetishist Daniel. I think he was expecting a real Latina, whatever that means. What does that mean? I think we should find out. Let's be real. In America, many people don't have any experience with many Latinos or Hispanics or any other ethnicity, really. All they have is what they see in TVs and in movies. Since my studies in film, television, and media cover a lot of these tropes, maybe in the future I'll do a video about it and I'll break things down like the female clown or the Latin lover. I'll touch on them a little in this video, but it won't be a proper deep dive. Latinos and Hispanics are often characterized as loud, uneducated, and paradoxically lazy yet job stealers. We'll get to that in a little bit. First, we should break down some of the most common stereotypes you see about Latinos and Hispanics in the media. I'm taking these terms from a Los Angeles Times article written by Trevel Anderson. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. The Spicy Sexpot, the Maid, the Gangbanger, and the Spanish-only speaker. All of these are over a century old and very, very harmful to Latinos and Hispanics. The Spanish-only speaker. This one's self-explanatory. You often see older folks from Latin America who never bothered to learn English. If you've ever met a first-generation immigrant from anywhere really, but from Latin America specifically, you'll find that they know enough English to communicate. They're not out there giving big, important speeches. You'll be able to communicate with them without much problem. In TV and in movies, when you encounter a non-English speaker, they are presented in one of two ways. If that person is from Europe, in particular France and Italy, you'll find that English speakers will want to learn their language. European languages are always presented as high class and aspirational. I wish I could speak that language. If the non-English speaker is from Latin America or from Asia, more often than not, you'll hear English speakers yell, "Speak English," at these poor people. Of course, that happens all the time in real life to Hispanic and Asian people. My favorite is when these racist a-holes say, "Speak American," or "Go back to your own country." I am waiting for the day for that to happen to me. Waiting. Champing at the bit. I cannot wait to drop some truth and science on these putos. It's like, first of all, here in the Los Angeles area, unless you are Chumash or Tongva, shut your puto mouth. Hell yeah, dude. I can't wait for that day. The only people I will accept to tell me to speak American or to go back to my own country are Native Americans. Period. 2. The Maid. This one plagues Latinos the most, but it's also very prevalent in the Black community. Many times you see a Latina or Hispanic in a movie, she's playing a maid. Famously, Hispanic actress Lupe Ontiveros, que descanse en paz, played a maid in over 150 different movies. 150 different movies. La chingan. This maid trope is very, very confusing because Latinos and Hispanics are often presented as lazy and dirty, yet we're always also presented as the maids or the help. Which is it, racists? Are we lazy and dirty? Or are we the only ones with the stamina and know-how and how to clean things? Make up your mind. In the Black community, the great Hattie McDaniel was the first Black person to win an Oscar for playing Mammy in Gone with the Wind. Then Hattie was offered nothing but maid and servant and mammy roles for the rest of her career. Now, if you're gonna tell me that this was an unfortunate part of being an actress of color at the time, listen to this one. National treasure and EGOT winner, that's Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony award winner, Rita Moreno won an Oscar for playing Anita in West Side Story in 1961. And after that, she was offered nothing but servant girls and maids for the rest of her career in Hollywood. Well, you're still focusing on old times. We were less woke back then, really. One of the most popular movies on Netflix right now about race is The Help, where badass Octavia Spencer won an Oscar for playing Minnie Jackson in that movie. A maid in a movie about white people solving racism. This was 2012, a more woke time. I make jokes about this trope all the time. At the beginning of this video, I said that if I were to have children, they would look white and I would look like the maid or the nanny. And you probably didn't even notice that joke because of how prevalent that trope is. I already look like the servant to my white-looking mom. And the trope lives on as recently as Yalitza Aparicio in the award-winning Roma movie, playing a maid and contributing to the maid trope. There you go. La chingan. 3. The Gangbanger. What's up, Holmes? I can't even do it. What's up, Holmes? Orale, it's Cholo time. Cholo is the most recent example of the gangbanger trope, particularly in the southwest region of the United States. I believe Cholos aren't a thing anymore. And to further that, they were never really a thing to begin with. They never really existed in the gangbanger kind of way that like cops and other media would have you believe they existed as. I'm not saying there weren't gangsters in the hood and the hood isn't dangerous, because it totally is. is, please stop gentrifying us. That's more a result of racism and no real opportunities for brown people from the hood in the real world. Gangbangers were and still are a few bad apples when they didn't have the opportunity for education or employment, fell into the gangbanging lifestyle. However, cholos and cholas do exist as a style, as an aesthetic. It's a style that goes all the way back to the 1930s with pachucos and pachucas. Them and their style was a rejection of them being expected to assimilate into white culture. That's why you see so much bright colors, so much personality, so much style and sass. It's more than just a moment. It's a whole feeling. Then, throughout the years, it evolved into the cholo and chola style that pop stars and fashion designers can't help but steal from. Everyone from Givenchy to Lana Del Rey to Gwen Stefani to Fergie to Rihanna to FKA Twigs to Pinche, Kendall, and Kylie Jenner. Some folks call this cultural appropriation. I'm not 100% sure it is cultural appropriation because cultural appropriation is a complex topic that I get a headache every time I try to think about it or explain it. But in broad strokes, if you're white, it's a cultural appropriation. White is not a culture, so it makes sense that white folks would try to appropriate from other places that have a culture and a history and that kind of thing. To clarify, white is not a culture. English, Irish, Welsh, German, Norwegian, Russian, Hungarian, Czech, French, Polish, etc. Those are cultures. If you're not white, I'm gonna look at it as cultural appreciation and the recognition of how badass cholas are. I do. That is not my style, but I do use chola slang on this channel. I put neta, a cholo slang for the truth, good, or to ask a question. And even though I live in East Aguas Carnal, Los Angeles, I haven't seen a cholo or chola in decades. There are a few, what my mom calls cholos descontinuados, discontinued cholos. They look like they were trying to be cholos at one point in their youth, but it didn't quite work out. The best example I have for this is former Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa. Folks got mad at Beto O'Rourke for trying to pander to Latinos, but no, Antonio Villaraigosa is the real panderer. Anyway, he looks like a cholo descontinuado. This stereotype exists to this day, with 45 launching a shockingly successful presidential campaign. I wanna die every time I think about it. Number 4, the Spicy Sexpot. This is the one I encountered the most during my more youthful, hopeful days of finding a mate and dating. When dudes, all dudes, figure out you're a Latina, you become an instant fetish. And this is what they're fantasizing about. No shade to any of these women who are super sexy Latinas. None at all. I'm super jelly. I will never look this good. And obviously, we don't all look like that. I know a bunch of dudes who were looking forward to meeting this, but got this feverish wreckage instead. And I'm sorry, dude. I really am. Overly sexualized women of color has been a problem forever. It has been so prevalent that even Disney princesses of color are overly sexualized. Why is this in a kid's movie? This affects people of color, women in particular, in a couple of different ways. Harassment and sexual violence being the most obvious ones. Things like not taking women seriously and being a racial fetishist, yet still being racist, is less obvious. For instance, when you see an overly sexualized woman of color, all you see are boobs and butt. That's all they are. Their only value comes from how attractive they are. That value is lost once the novelty wears off or someone younger and hotter comes along. Ever wonder why Jenny, queen of the block, is constantly on a diet, is constantly working out 2 or 3 hours a day, is constantly passed over for more prestigious roles in movies and in TV? Badass J-Lo knows, as a woman of color, the majority of her value comes from how she looks. White women have this problem too, but they have more of a chance to play moms or grandmas or to play historical figures, even if those historical figures aren't white. Women of color who are overly sexualized aren't given a chance to be taken seriously because look at her, she's a sexy lady. How could you take that seriously? She's nothing but boobs and a butt. Sexy ladies don't have thoughts or ideas. It was always weird to me when dudes were surprised at how smart I am, and I'm not even pretty. The other way is to be involved with a racial fetishist. Scholar and critical theorist Homi K. Bahaba defines racial fetishism as a version of racial stereotyping based on multiple contradictory beliefs, where the other is both demonized and idolized. The other, in many academic disciplines, is defined in contrast as to what is considered normal in a social setting. In American society, normal is seen as a cisgendered male who is straight, white, and able-bodied. Anyone else that falls outside of that normal is seen as the other. And mi familia, there are so many racial fetishes out there, it's kind of nuts. I know a majority of guys I went out with were this. I was the girl that was okay for a good time, but not really seen as like serious relationship material because I was a fetish. I, like so many other women of color, was there to scratch an itch, which is fine. Again, I seem to have a white boy fetish. But those bros were attracted to and looking forward to a certain stereotype that I just wasn't gonna fulfill. And for some of those, I'm glad I never fulfilled that. I know a lot of these dudes vote Republican. I know they support this administration, manos de estómago. They are not anti-racist. They are casually racist. But they can lay claim to not being racist because look, they're dating a woman of color. Sure, brah. Being not Latina enough is also known by another term, being whitewashed. I have a lot of issues with this term, and we're gonna talk about them. Before we get into this one, let's go ahead and define what whitewashed is. Now, I'm not talking about the whitewashing Hollywood does with movie roles. Having white actors take on roles meant and made for people of color. Why is this still a thing? I also don't mean the other whitewashing Hollywood does when they take an actor, mostly of Latino or Hispanic descent, and make them pass as white. The most famous example of this I can think of is when Hollywood took foreign-looking Margarita Carmen Cancino and whitewashed her into Hollywood icon and legend Rita Hayworth. Both of these are great topics for a future video, but not this one. I'm talking about being called whitewashed by people when you don't fit into stereotypes or ideas people have about your ethnic group. Now, let's say you're Black or Asian or Hispanic or Native American, and you meet someone white, or maybe even someone from your own ethnic group, and they come at you saying you're not Black enough, you're not Asian enough, you're not Latino enough, you're not Native American enough. Whatever the hell that means. And since you're not enough, you are labeled as whitewashed. And as we have already covered, being Latino is a very narrow and very offensive definition in popular media and with a lot of white folks. I haven't flat out been called whitewashed to my face, but I have been accused of not being Latina enough or Mexican American enough. I have somehow failed my background and my heritage by not being a caricature that people are expecting to see when they meet me. I'm glad all you know about Latino and Mexican culture is what you see in TV and movies, a bunch of tropes that were invented over a century ago. Good job. Let's have Urban Dictionary give us the exact definition. Whitewashed, someone who doesn't act their race from racist stereotypes, a derogatory term used to describe a minority who has assimilated with Western society, an absurd, patronizing term used for non-white people who don't fulfill their negative racial stereotypes, when a person who isn't white forgets their culture and acts like a white person. Let's go ahead and define assimilation while we're here. Here's how Encyclopedia Britannica defines assimilation. In anthropology and sociology, the process whereby individuals or groups of differing ethnic heritage are absorbed into the dominant culture of society. The process of assimilation involves taking on the traits of the dominant culture to such a degree that the assimilating group becomes socially indistinguishable from other members of society. For me, the whitewashing term is more of a joke that happens between friends and family. Because of how overly educated we are, our taste in music, movies, TV shows, even our taste in the people we date is not what you would expect. Because of all of that, we would be dubbed whitewashed. I would argue though, why is it whitewashing when, as children of immigrants, we are expected to assimilate into American culture? We've achieved, we've assimilated, so what's the problem? The only thing I could think is that people are not comfortable when they think they figured everything out, then someone like me comes along and throws a wrench into their carefully cogged perception of the world. While doing research for this video, I thought I was gonna have to define what being white is. I did a lot of research and I collected a lot of information. And I figured out that being whitewashed and being white are two separate things. They're related, but they're really two separate things. So watch out for a video coming soon about what it means to be white. But for now, we're just focusing on the whitewash. Spoiler alert, there's no real definition on what being white means. So stay tuned for that one. Now let's go back to the whitewashing term. The main thing I've noticed about being referred to as someone who is whitewashed, being educated, and being well versed in American pop culture. Let's start with the pop culture thing. I don't know if you guys know this, but America's biggest export around the world is our culture. Everything from TV shows, to the movies, to the fashion, to the music, to the ideology, even to the food. How many pinches McDonald's are there around the world? Already, many people around the world are very familiar with and follow very closely American pop culture. It's already a thing. Now, being a US born brown girl, the only culture you get here is American pop culture. So everything I absorbed was the American pop culture that was popular at the time. Fun fact, American pop culture, much like American English actually, is a mishmash of stuff from a bunch of other cultures and a bunch of other places. Asian cinema, black music, Italian fashion, French food, Argentinian gauchos, Mediterranean democracy. I could go on, but I think you guys get the point. Assimilating feels kind of silly when it comes to American pop culture because the pop culture is built to absorb and exploit other customs and styles and cultures. Once money can be made, then it's acceptable and cool. That's the real America, hyper-capitalism. Well, I'm not a hyper-capitalist, so maybe, yeah, I have been fully assimilated, but in the other stuff, I am fully assimilated. Not so much because I had to, although it does help, it's because that's all there is. You have to make an effort to absorb culture and media from anywhere else. And in real and true American fashion, if the effort that it takes is more than some, who's gonna bother? Now let's move on to the educated part. I don't like to say that I'm educated, only because it sounds like I feel like I'm better than other people. And let's be clear, familia, I do not feel like I'm better than anybody else. And why would I feel like I'm better than anybody else? Only because I have a moderately priced degree. The quest to be better and to do better is an ongoing one. And I try to be, in my everyday life, as non-caca as I possibly can. Anyway, the better term I feel is I have an education. I graduated from a public high school in the Los Angeles Unified School District. I graduated with an AA degree from East Los Angeles College. I got my bachelor's degree from the California State University, Los Angeles. I was hoping to further my education with a master's degree, or dare I dream, a PhD. After a bunch of rejection letters, I just gave up on that quest. But still, I don't let my education end at whatever it is I learned at college. Being a super curious person, I'm constantly wanting to learn anything and everything I can. The thing I absolutely hate saying when asked a question is, I don't know. Usually I'll say, let me find out, or let's Google that, shall we? But saying I don't know feels wrong. And it's not that I need to be the smartest person ever in existence, it's just nice to know things. And we all have the internet literally at the tips of our fingers. There is no excuse to not be knowledgeable about things anymore. Information's right there. Finding information on the internet isn't like in the olden days when you weren't sure who was putting stuff out there and if that stuff that you were seeing was reputable or not. But now it's a lot easier. There's a lot of places that will tell you accurately the facts, the stats, and the figures. Just look at legitimate newspapers or scientific journals. Please, for everybody's sake. I take issue with having an education being equated with being whitewashed. First of all, it makes it seem like only white people are the ones who are smart. And judging by all these Karen and Cletus fests there are with this Trump virus, a lot of white folks aren't intellectual intellectual, they are pseudo-intellectuals. Merriam-Webster defines pseudo-intellectual as a person who wants to be thought of as having a lot of intelligence and knowledge, but who is not really intelligent or knowledgeable. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in 2008 released a list of the top 10 countries with the highest percentage of their population who have some kind of higher education degree. That education could be a 2-year college, a 4 to 8-year university, or a trade school. The US is ranked 6th. The UK, Korea, Israel, Japan, and Canada all outrank the US by quite a bit. Not so shockingly, us out here in the US want to think we're the smartest ever in the history of the world, but we're really not as smart as we think we are. It's not a good look, Chief. And again, based on these findings, I'm not as assimilated or whitewashed as previously thought. My desire to be smart comes from my family. My dad taught me my multiplication tables. My mom will make fun of me if she asks me something and I don't know the answer to it. My sister, who has 2 master's degrees, has taught me a lot about everything, and she too will make fun of me if she asks me something and I don't know the answer. She'll be like, you need to keep up. My parents pushed for us to go to school and go to college and get educated. My mom is so bummed that I wasn't able to get a postgraduate degree. My sister set a path and the example on how to be a smarty pants. Did she get the idea and inspiration for higher education from white people? No. She got it from the 1987 classic sitcom, A Different World. A sitcom where mostly black kids go to a historically black college. Seeing white people go to college is arguably the norm in America. Seeing folks who are not white go to college is inspirational. You can achieve even if you're not white. Education is the greatest equalizer in society. At least it should be. My parents, being immigrants, that is what they came here for. For a better life and for their kids to thrive. That's the point. To reach that mythical American dream everybody talks about. For us to achieve and maybe surpass that mythical dream is the very point of being an American. Not just for immigrants and those of us children of immigrants, but literally for everyone from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. Being called whitewashed because I'm educated undermines all the hard work, all the sacrifice, everything that went into being a smart, educated person. It was earned, and I would rather not be associated with these folks. Next time you call someone whitewashed or not a real insert ethnic group here because they don't fit into tired stereotypes, don't. Just don't. Try and get to know people from minority groups that are not familiar to you. It'll do you and the world as a whole good if you do that. And to racial fetishist Daniel, I remember you being really hot, so call me. Wait, what am I saying? The surfer guys were way hotter and more fun and not racial fetishists. One of those guys should call me.